A very
Oh,
happy
yes.
Sunday on June 13th in the year of our Lord 2021. We have Reverend Dennis Reynolds coming to us to talk about his service somewhere, somehow. So thank you very much, Dennis, for being here. And JC will start us off as is appropriate.
Uh, I didn't know that was the title, and I guess I sat down late. But what a wonderful choice of two words to be for just now, because we don't really know what, where, or what, how to go into this next time of our lives, because no one could have guessed that the whole culture could have been put on hold for a year. I mean, you just don't ever think that's possible. And listening to you, Dennis, to this morning, besides what all you were talking about and the place of love and what love actually looks like when we do it, somehow I also had this thought that it's really, really hard to imagine something that doesn't already exist in order to make it exist. And that's that one song that we got to hear almost twice, but with Martha's rendition as a reading and your presenting it, just was such a beautiful, hands open challenge. Not a, boy, you got to do this challenge, but here it is, people. Find out what the sometime, somewhere, somewhat is. And your story about the flag and the back end of the truck, boy, I was right following you right down the line as long as I saw that red flag with the stripe. And then when you saw what it really was, I thought that has got to be something that happened inside to have you feel you change your attitude about that young man and his truck and his flag and his blessing to the world. So I don't know, I was right with you. I didn't get any big particular answers, but I do know that I like the original Broadway concept, the challenge to the culture.
Yeah.
If you haven't looked at the suggested recorded version that Michael sent out along with the link to the service, I recommend it. You know, because there's a variety of them out there, and because of licensing challenges and stuff, we don't show the, you know, a YouTube video as part of a record service in terms of copyright issues and such. But that's a way we found to sort of get to them, is to recommend you go ahead and follow the link. And the particular one is a queered choir, which is the trans and non-binary choir, individual voices singing, you know, a virtual recording. And it frames the question in that context. From those identities is a whole other way to look at that question of somewhere, somehow, you know, to reach out and take hands.
Yeah.
And for me, and I told Martha, you know, when we pre-recorded this on Thursday, I said, this one just came to me. I mean, sometimes I'm like doing readings and somewhere this song came in as a soundworm in my ear. And I don't know why it came to me now. And I went, whoa, that's certainly a song for this time. And then I started looking at it closer and listening to some of the recorded versions, everything from the Broadway to the movie version to Barbara Streisand's version, and a bunch of, and kids on America's Got Talent singing it. And, it's done and done again. And, Martha said it was all she could do to not launch into song. But she didn't trust her voice. I didn't let that stop me.
No.
I didn't trust my voice.
I thought you did an admirable job there.
Yeah.
It is my great terror to do that. I'll admit it, since there's only a few of you here, to sing from the pulpit. I'm usually like, turn off the sound, but it's time for the hymn. I want to lead the hymn, but I decided I wanted to sing it a little bit. But and then when I did a little more digging, I knew the piece about the timing of Broadway. That it was in the late 50s, right at the in the midst of the civil rights movement, and that racial connotation was profound. But until I did a little Google research over the past week or so, I didn't know about East Side Story. They were going to do it as something different. And I remembered vaguely I was an undergraduate theater major for a while, and, took Shakespeare and pre-Elizabethan drama and those classes. So I remembered some stuff that a lot of his plays had a secondary message. And I remembered something about Romeo and Juliet. So I looked at that a little closer. That sense of conflict, whether it's between Catholics and Protestants in Elizabethan England, Jews and Christians in America in the first half of the 20th century, racial animosity, the animosities of our times against about political values and views about the pandemic and other issues that divide us, is a universal struggle of humanity. How do we bridge those chasms that seem so deep between us? And I think our universalist part of our teaching is the only chance we got.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Lillian.
It's really interesting to me, Dennis, that you came up with it this week and this month. This is Gay Pride Month.
Right.
And to add some more dimensions to what you were just sharing, gays and lesbians have been really abused, as you well know, by churches for a very long time. And I think sometimes the most prayerful that as a group we may have gotten in the 70s was the singing together, not out loud in demonstrations, but the singing together of that song. And then it repeated itself again in the 80s during AIDS. So for the gay and lesbian community, it's been a prayerful, almost sometimes a plea, but other times a demand. But it's just played a really significant role within the community over the years.
Well, and I think you lift up an important part. I mean, that's one of the, successes we have achieved a lot of in this culture. Homophobia is still very much alive and well. I still remember when I was in Washington State when the Legal Marriage State Initiative went forward, and we celebrated the victory, but there were still 47% of the voters who voted against it. And it's like 52% voted for it, but it was still not like an overwhelming acceptance, and recognizing that reality. And yeah, I mean, that's part of why I looked at that choir who sang of that. Still, non-binary and trans communities are still looking for a broader acceptance of just the simple choices of what pronouns they ask to be called by. So it's an ongoing piece. And the piece you lift up about Pride Month, I'm doing a virtual service. Well, actually, I'm going to go there to pre-record in Florence on the coast next week for Father's Day, which I think is even more complicated by the fact that it shows up in the middle of Pride Month. And, or towards the end of the month. But I'm going to bring that up again. I'm bringing that up when I talk about Father's Day. Father's Day is complicated not only by everybody's history, good or not so good, with whoever was their donor, whether they were part of their life or not. That I think is complicated in so many ways around identity. So, I thank you for lifting up that piece about that song. And again, that lifts up the power of music. And I find it hard when we don't get to sing together and hear each other to go as deep. There's a depth that comes with singing together that I believe is a form of prayer. It's melodic prayer is what hymns give to us, and whether it's social political movements or religious services, they're more powerful when we can accompany them with music, or even more so, sing along or dance along with the revolution, as the case may be.
Well,
Go ahead, Martha. Yeah.
okay. Well, the dimension of music, as you know, is one thing that I really enjoy. And that brings to mind that discussion that Dr. Rideout from Ann Arbor, that wonderful young Black man who is their music director that does all that wonderful music that we have seen and been exposed to. And he said, the hope for Unitarianism to reach, especially people of color, is to develop more music. People of, for example, the Black churches, how they get their emotions out. It is done by music, which then hits the soul, which then hits the other parts of our being. And that really affects me a lot. What I wanted to also bring out is that story about the flag. It really brings home how we prejudge situations. We all are prone to saying, okay, that person I'm not probably going to want to, have a discussion with. But it basically, it just shows all of us our human frailties and our even though we have we're well intended. I think we're what is it? The future is paved with well intentions, whatever the saying is. We all have good intentions. But sometimes we resort to our very visceral feelings that are still there. And I think that's something that everybody, no matter who they are, need to work out, discuss. So, and that was brought up in the context of this discussion, which really, it was very timely. And what do we do except continue on, as you have often said?
Well, I probably said with this group at some point that I'm glad I embrace a theology that offers at least the possibility I may get more than one lifetime to get this right.
But it's true. Yeah. So thank you for that.
And Martha, I thought that you had gotten there, and it's like,
Where?
me, it was imperfect and still carry judgment into the world,
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I've done a good job of pulling the wool over everybody's eyes.
Saint Martha. That's good.
Saint
There is one.
Martha.
Isn't there a Saint Martha? There is.
There has to be.
There has to be.
Yeah.
I mean,
But I
there's a
like the label Saint Martha of Uncle.
There you go. I'm
okay,
into
I
it.
think I'm going to put a plaque on my door of my office and then have Joe knock and Jenny Fleck before he comes in.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, I'm gonna watch that.
What? I didn't hear.
Watch that.
Jenny Fleck.
He got tangled up with his walker. Trying to genuflect.
Yeah.
My memory is failing me. Glennis, have you spoken yet?
No,
Yeah.
and I'm frankly um, still just kind of waking up. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry.
That's okay. I
I
think it's
saw
going
the
around.
sermon. I saw it last night, and so it's not as fresh in my mind as it could be if I'd have seen it this morning.
Mm.
But you touched on a couple of things that brought up a couple of thoughts, and one of them is Father's Day. Um, I had two fathers, one of whom I've never met, and one of whom raised me, and I thought he did a marvelous job. Um, and it's just so many gifts that I'd gotten from both of them. It's hard to enumerate them. Even the one that I hadn't met, I inherited a lot from him. Um, and I don't know why I'm even on this track, because we're talking about somewhere, somehow. But at the same time, that was something that I was going through as I was doing the search. And in that search, I was actually bringing about discovery of who I am. And that somewhere, somehow was kind of a theme all the way through
Mhm,
this complete
mhm.
search, that some way, somehow I will know who I am, because the truth of it was that I wasn't told I'd even been adopted until I found out myself at 27. So this has been, ever since that day, has been a rebuilding, and that somewhere, somehow, just kind of always knew that somewhere, somehow I would figure out who I am. And that's kind of the take that I've gotten from it so far. I'm interested in hearing more of the discussion so I can chime in. So um, that's probably it for now.
That's beautiful, though. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a really like great thing to pull from the discussion of how it affects you personally.
Mhm.
Did you
it
want to
just,
oh, go ahead.
what, when Glennis brings that up, and we often talk about those things, good friends do. It really brings home that some of us don't just take for granted who we are. Okay. I mean, we do inherit all these things from our parents, traits and the habits and baggage, yada, 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 but at least we know who they are. And not to know who your real genetic father or mother is quite I mean, and to find out at 27, that is a large, large, uh,
Yeah, that rips
yeah,
your identity away,
it,
the identity that you
yeah,
had built so far. And
yeah, does a number on you. Yeah.
most kids know when and if I had known as I was growing up,
Right.
I don't know that I might necessarily have searched, because I wasn't upset that I was adopted. I did actually kind of want to know some medical information, at least,
Yeah.
but I wasn't um, linked into having this perfect parent that I had somehow placed me for adoption or whatever. That wasn't in my head. It was more of a self-discovery thing all along.
And I think, Glennis, you talk on, and there is that reality of the multifaceted nature of identity. And some of it's orientation and sexual or gender identity, some of it's identity within a family context or a cultural context, and you were seeking for a particular facet of your identity, as I hear you, to more fully understand self.
Yeah.
And
For
fully accept self. You know.
for example, I found my birth father a year ago, little over a year ago, and as all of you know, I'm a bass player, and it turns out that he was a bass player. He was a performing bass player,
Oh, really?
playing jazz and blues in Detroit.
Cool.
So
A lot
I
of good themes there.
I never knew the guy, but I did, and this is him. So there's that kind of identity that I had been lacking all along. Even before I knew I was adopted, that there was no way I could actually relate as there was, I just kind of felt sort of drifty, untethered in a way. It was weird.
Oh,
And that can do it. And just think of in society, all those people that don't have that identity for some reason. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of, that's a lot of the issues with our society is there's lack of identity of who we are, and we don't have that solid foundation as a young person. And we all know is if you don't learn to trust and know who you
Yeah.
are, or, that's at age 3, that trust versus mistrust never goes away. And our prisons are full of kids that never trusted it or never had the opportunity to learn to trust. And
Yeah. The weird thing was that all of my classmates knew.
Oh, wow.
and you,
I
oh, wow,
did not. And I had a feeling all the way through there was something that they know that's
that you didn't.
kind of important that
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah.
Boy.
It's
Wow,
weird. It's a weird feeling. So
it is.
this was just a journey of healing. And then that somehow it started with the discovery, and then moved on and developed over the next 40, 20, 27 years. Yeah.
the talk of Father's Day being next week, I haven't really thought about it. And yet, as I'm listening to this, I'm saying, okay, yeah, he had a lot to do with my identity, because at a crucial time when I was 16, he sat me down at the dining room table, just the two of us, and he said, Jack, I see you trying to save your mother from alcohol. I can't do it. We don't know how to do it, but you can't do it either. So you have to pack your bag with who you are and get out of here and go to college someplace far enough away that you can't get home for the weekend and we can't get to you. You have to go off by yourself and find out who you are. And I remember hearing those words. And it said, oh, and he said, I will always take care of your mother, but you are not, you're not the one to do this. So take yourself and get out of here.
Wow.
And I did within 2 years. So he did, like, it wasn't the coming in, it was the going out that he offered me with the stipulation that he would take care of her. He wouldn't ever cast her adrift. So I'm thinking, yeah, I have a lot to do next weekend, other than the fact that I will be at a wedding with the rest of my family and with a new family that is joining our family and all of that. But I'm gonna take it seriously, because when you talk about identity and the things that goes into it, it's one thing to be the adult child of an alcoholic. It's another thing to have had somebody say, you aren't the one to do this. Go do you. I'll take care of her. And I have to feel incredible gratefulness for that, because it worked.
Yeah, you were very, very lucky to have that man in
Yeah,
your life.
right.
Wow.
Were
To
you?
take that, yeah.
Oh, I was just curious. Were you ever able to forgive your mother while she was alive? Like, were you ever able to go to her and?
No, I was not able to go to her because she could not receive it.
Oh, okay.
But right through that door there, down that hall, sometime in the last 2 years, I was just struck by the awareness. Oh, she was living her life. It wasn't about me. and a terrific freedom. Just, it's like taking off some kind of a garment that had been around from my neck to the floor that I didn't realize I was wearing. And I just realized, oh, right. And so the irony of it is that the grandson who's getting married next weekend, his mother, who is not within the core family anymore, is also an alcoholic. And so he and I have that. And I'm so glad that this has happened to me now, because now I will think differently about the blessing of his marriage, that encourage him to know himself that he was not the reason. I mean, in other words, that's a shared parallel that somehow I need to know, that over the next few years, I need him to know the two stories.
Yeah.
So that he can know that he is not the reason.
Well, and what you're talking about is stories of liberation,
Yes.
stories of letting go, and there's the small little pieces. I mean, like, I'm still trying to liberate myself from excessive judgment, which I was pretty open about that, but and those huge ones. I mean, I had the good fortune, I describe my upbringing as there's a New Yorker cartoon that I cut out and saved for a while, but eventually lost. And it was this big, meeting hall, and somebody's up at the lectern, and you can see the audience is almost nearly empty. And across the banner, across the stage reads, annual gathering of the Society for the Adult Children of Fairly Normal Parents. There was almost no one in the audience, right? And I say
I
I'm
remember that
gifted and
cartoon.
honored to be part of that group. I'm an adult child of fairly normal parents.
Yeah.
My father and I had some issues, and you'll have to log in after your Sunday service to the recorded one from Florence, and I'll talk a little bit about that next week at a different virtual church. I mean, this whole virtual church thing is just mind-boggling to me sometimes. I went to church in Eugene, while some of you were going to church in Roseburg listening to me preach, right? And right now, Eugene is having the virtual annual meeting, which I already voted. So it's like, and I shared with Michael and Martha when we were recording this week. I did another service in Florence a couple of weeks ago, and for Memorial Day. But their person who does the recording wasn't available the week of Memorial Day, so we recorded it a whole week ahead. And it was actually shown 9 days after I recorded it. I felt like I'm doing television here,
You kind of are.
It's better than television, Dennis.
Yeah, I guess.
This is new media.
Right. Well,
television is legacy media.
And I will put it out to you folks too, the reminder, and I've seen Martha put it out there, that we're okay if people show up on Thursday and sit quietly in the back. I like performing to a live studio audience. And I even looked to Martha and Michael for affirmations of what I'm saying.
We're
And I
going
get
like
a
this
lot
and going
more
like
from
this.
Martha because Michael's paying attention to the technology. And his face isn't, as expressive as to what's going on inside that head.
That's true. Yes.
And his head nods quite often, when you see his head nodding, and he's we know that shorthand.
That's my tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you were talking about you know, the story about the gentleman with the flag, and it made me think about my own journey. Um, is that I can get along with just about anybody. You know, when during the whole upheaval of the 2015 2016, um, where just like all of these they're not new political opinions, but political opinions that had just been buried below the surface. So all of a sudden you had people speaking openly about things like democratic socialism and anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-socialism, libertarian socialism and white
Mm.
nationalism, um, and I was just fascinated. I was utterly fascinated. And so I reached out to people who held these beliefs, and people were just baffled as to why I would do this. And I started thinking about my own story, about how I was such an ardent communist for so much of my life, you know, and then slowly coming to see how deeply flawed that ideology is. But yet I was so adhered to the culture and the concept of communism. And now I'm so far away from that it's hardly worth, you know, it's hardly worth mentioning. But in my own journey, you know, when I come across somebody who's a communist or a socialist, I just say, yeah, I used to be that way too. You know, I used to think that way. I have no problem not judging them, because then I'd be judging myself at that point.
Right.
And I think that for people who have not experienced a radical a truly radical change in their personal belief system, I could imagine the modern political landscape being somewhat scary to them.
Well, I think you bring up a point, Michael, that now the volume is so pumped
Mhm.
up. And social media is a factor in all of that. You know, we can find our little group and sort of, you know, speak out loud and not have to engage in debate, and a whole lot of other factors that come to play in that. But I did an interesting thing after Suzanne and I talked about the thing about flag. And it's like, I have a little piece of, okay, the election's over, let's like move on. And then after my question of what I thought that flag was going to be, I went out and took the Biden bumper sticker off of my car.
Mm.
And I need to stop flying my flag about the election if I think the election is over. And so I made that decision myself. I still have my, you know, be careful what you know, think kinds of bumper stickers.
Mhm.
My Buddhist bumper sticker is still there, but the political, you know, partisan bumper sticker, um, you know, was there. And the other fascinating piece related to that is, depending on which community we're in, the New York Times had a thing. You could log on to a little thing through the Times, and it would tell you the proportion of voters in your zip code by party registration. And I'm in Eugene, you know, I'm in South Eugene, a good liberal. 80% of the registered voters in my zip code are Democratic.
Yeah,
But if you cross the river in Springfield, it's 50-50,
right.
you know? And so, you know, we have this tendency to land in bubbles, and, you know, and stay in our little bubbles by geography, by class, by race, by gender, by identity, um, you know, and I'm still in this like bursting bubbles and trying to figure out how to expand the bubble,
Well,
to be more inclusive.
and there was an article, it was all about like Republican Unitarian Universalists, and I swear the testimonials from the Republican Unitarian Universalists read like if you were to exchange gay in 1972 for Republican, you know, that's how they read. It's like there's this deep feeling of shame of coming out as a Republican, you know,
Oh,
in a
no.
Unitarian Universalist. But one of the charts that they gave was that, you know, UUs are about 90% Democrat, registered Democrat. And that's an interesting statistic because in the article, it actually listed now, you might think that it's 90% Democrat and 10% Republican, but that's not the case at all. It's like 90% Democrat and like 6% Green and, 2% Libertarian. And, so that the political ideology of the faith is extremely pronounced.
Yeah,
And so
you use a vote lifted up that a bit more than I even feel comfortable.
mhm. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that's a deeper conversation for something.
Right. No, I mean, I just bring that up in the sense is that, I agreed with the message, and I also went, is this really where we should be
Right.
as a faith community? And I say that in a context of, I voted for the Eugene congregation to adopt the eighth principle.
Oh.
And we went through the democratic process, and hopefully that got voted in today, which is the fifth principle. And people who push back against the eighth principle sometimes lift up the fifth. And I think our decisions, if we come to them collectively, are a different thing and congregationally than what happens out of Boston that we're all encouraged to do. But yeah, it is a divisive time, and it is the demographic is also consistent with kind of educational level. We struggle with being as inclusive as we claim we want to be, particularly around issues of class, and how we define class, the educational level, socially, economically, and all those variables. And part of what we are doing, I think, at some levels, at least around racial issues, is owning the larger UU history. Like the history of the old churches that have these beautiful buildings that were
Mhm,
not by slave owners, but by slave traders who owned the ships.
mhm.
That's what the Boston Brahmins of old school Unitarianism owned, the ships,
Mm,
transported slaves to this continent. And people have owned that reality as part of history.
Do you know the names of those people?
There was some atonement done by a number of the Boston churches.
Huh. Okay.
They did services of atonement, and I'm blanking on the guy's name who was a staff to the fellowship committee whose family acknowledged that they had been investors.
Interesting.
So it's part of those realities. I mean, it's American history,
yes.
and
I
we,
mean,
and we know that. And I don't want to overdwell on that, but understand where we're. I mean, it's that old line: how you going to know where you're going if you don't know where you come from?
exactly.
But let's emphasize where we want to go.
Yeah. Glennis, you had your hand up a while ago.
And Kim's been pretty quiet for
Kim's
Kim.
been quiet, but I asked Kim, I said, do you want to talk? And Kim. So yeah, Kim, you interject anytime you want. But Glennis and then Laleen had something.
Okay. Yesterday, and you guys mostly, I've talked about this before, but I'm in a band that plays heavy rock, and they're all on the opposite political side for me. And yesterday, one of them asked me a direct question, an opinion of me. So I quietly gave it, and it disagrees with theirs. And we had a very short conversation after that about politics. And then we went back to playing music and having a good time. And I got a text from him afterwards. He says, okay, no more politics at rehearsal. But he says, I just want you to know we all love you. And I said, I love you back, and let that side of it go and enjoy the rest of it. And so that I see that in my realm more and more. Then it's almost like kind of a softening of position that I'm seeing coming, and I'm enjoying that, even if it's on a small scale. Just piece by piece, we come together and decide that, well, I still like you, and I still want to be a part of your thing. But yeah, we disagree on politics. So what, and that's how it's come out. And like I said, that's not even the only instance that I've run into of that. And I'm happy to say that it's more of a matter of, okay, yeah, I respect you. And yeah, we're never going to agree on that. But, I
Never know.
respect you and I'm not trying to change your mind.
So that's the core of our universalist, side of the faith, which is why I asked Martha to end with the Jose Ballou piece about, if we agree in love, no other disagreement will do us harm.
Right.
And, and we have these little conversations sometimes when we're recording. And I think I've just shared with Martha and Michael that I'm one of those Unitarian Universalists who considers Unitarian an adjective.
Yeah.
for Universalism. And Unitarianism historically has been pretty heady.
Yeah.
And I feel like the merger of Unitarianism and Universalism is heart and mind coming together.
Agreed. Yes. Definitely.
And we're still working on that 50 years later. What does
Yeah.
that mean? And we can get pretty darn heady. And let's balance that with just being open-hearted to each other and practice how we can be more open-hearted in wider circles. That's what I think congregational life is about.
Yeah. And so again, with the, somewhere, somehow, that's actually a part of what I was thinking as you were speaking, is that somewhere, somehow, we're going to actually reconfigure ourselves and be stronger. That's my hope. That's my plan. That's the energy that I'm trying to tap into.
God, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
Well, yeah, I guess we'll find out. Yeah. Laleen wanted to go, and then Kim, maybe you can think about interjecting.
No pressure, Kim. I had several thoughts along the way about different things that you were saying, Dennis, and several other people were. But I just wanted to tell you how grateful I am for South Eugene, South Lane County. And this is a very hot political statement, I'm sure, but we would not have DeFazio if the distribution were not as strong as it is as our representative from Douglas County. So I'm grateful, for that. But more importantly, I don't know what the correlation relationship is between intelligence and free thought and liberal thought, and who becomes a Unitarian and who doesn't. I just know that if one is part of a group, as I have been, who found traditional Bible-based religion to be extremely unwelcoming, hurtful, threatening, all kinds of things historically, and not so different now in many of them. Finding one's way to universalism is it's just the most reasonable progression that any gay or lesbian person could imagine. And it's also interesting to me that all of my life, even though I never joined until I moved in any church until I moved to Roseburg, I always knew that my gay and lesbian friends, if they went anywhere for the most part, were Unitarians. In all of the Los Angeles area, just a couple of exceptions, and in later years, Center for Spiritual Living or Church of Religious Science, however you want to frame that, became an attraction. But what I've seen And what gives me hope for Democrats and Republicans is that as we as a society continue to broaden, we actually find fewer gays and lesbians flocking to Unitarian Universalism. There is more acceptance in a broader range of options. And, you know, I think the right to marry, though the vote was tight, was huge. I mean, absolutely huge. And so I bring to that longevity of view, I would say it spans at least 60 years of my very conscious life, to where I see us stuck right now as in our political arena. And it may have to be that some old views need to die off. But I also believe that there needs to be a religious reawakening. And I say that because I've seen the sins of religion in the past be so cruel. And I've watched some of those religions change and shift. And my prayerfulness for them, those that hold tight, is that they too will reconcile their notion of a loving God and a loving of all people with their polar opposite framing around some groups of people within the practice of the church. So that's, I'll just stop there. That's about 2/3 of my thought, but that's juicy enough, I'm sure.
And I know when I got to Whitby, as there was, you know, called to serve as their minister, the first event that was already scheduled at the church that I spoke at, a community event, was a musical celebration of Referendum 74, which was Washington's right to marry legislation. You know, and then I also so I kind of walked into what the congregation was already engaged in, because I was moving from California and Oregon. And I also inherited a position on the board of PFLAG, which on Whidbey Island is the primary LGBTQ support organization. Because the prior minister had been on it, and the UU minister is on the PFLAG board. And I got to be good friends with a woman who had attended the UU congregation for many years, who was leaving because the Lutheran Church was now affirming and accepting. And she had trouble being out as a Christian in that particular UU congregation. And she could go back to her Christian church and be out as a lesbian and as a Christian. And a colleague who I got to be friends with too, who was the local chaplain for the local hospice on Whidbey Island, was ordained in the Metropolitan Church. And he started attending the Lutheran Church. And kind of said, well, maybe we don't need a Metropolitan Church anymore if we can be open and out in other Christian communities. And so UU's lost some members when Christian churches became more welcoming and affirming. And people could go home to a faith that didn't have room for them. And I saw some of my classmates in the seminary, one of them changed from UU to UCC, who have always been pretty affirming.
Yeah.
The congregation. But in one of my classes, I had a preaching class. There were 14 of us in class, 12 men, two men, 12 women. 7 of the 12 women identified as lesbians. And those denominations lost some powerful preachers and some amazing personalities who had gifts to give to faith. And, and some of them, at least for a while, UU's got them because, you know, their communities wouldn't let them. I mean, today, our service in Eugene was from the intern who's wrapping up her year, who was raised Catholic. And she's a UU because the church of her childhood said there was no room for her as a woman
In
by
the ministry,
leadership.
yeah.
You know, and that was the beginning of her journey out of Catholicism, was gender-based. So, you know, in a strange kind of way, other people's judgment as, you know, ended up being UU as a sanctuary, a place to land for people who still wanted a community of faith, but the ability to redefine what does that word mean.
That's really interesting. I had never put all this together.
What do you think, Kim? You got anything for us?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be the truck with the Trump flag on it, waving it proudly, and ready to discuss anything, but not argue with people.
Mhm.
Well, and that's the piece. I mean, how do we lift up our own values without getting in people's face about it? And I still struggle with how do I create an environment where
You just have to realize that we live in a society with free speech. And if in order for me to have free speech, I have to let you have free speech. And I don't always agree with it, but there it is, free speech.
right. You know, and what are the boundaries of some speech that people find harmful? And what I'm thinking about in particular is speech that is an aggression towards, you know, a marginalized community, whatever it may be. I think I shared from the pulpit when I divided the congregation in Klamath Falls into male, female, and a person who identified as gender non-binary felt hurt by that. And that was the day I missed the mark. You know, and trying to be inclusive of everyone is my part of you know, of trying to open up to real free speech, but also empowering the individual. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Michael looks perplexed.
Well, I'm curious if you feel like your misgendering was somehow equivalent to like physical harm. Like is there a parallel between walking up to somebody and slapping them, for instance?
Yeah, well, I'm a firm believer that old adage, you know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is not true.
No, words hurt. Words hurt.
The greatest, right, the greatest
Yeah.
pain I've ever felt in my life were not from, I mean, part of the stories of my father was he never hit me in anger, but
Yeah.
sometimes I wish he'd just slap me and stop the lecture.
Huh. Have you
The lecture was painful.
that's interesting. I mean, not to get too personal, but have you ever been in a fist fight? Like
Yeah.
where your life was on the line?
No, never
Okay.
never on the line fist fight. I mean, I had an adolescent fight or two.
Okay.
You
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
know,
Um,
but you know, I think that, you know, verbal comments can be very wounding.
I
And
don't doubt that at all.
and that's where, you know, it's hard to have the conversation when we don't get beyond the flags and the trumpets and the, you know, and the drama around it. How do we discuss it calmly? And like I said, I took my Biden bumper sticker out of my car too, because I didn't want to be flying my flag. I wanted to move beyond that. And, you know, whichever flag, but I also had those signs of my lawn, you know, but that's my kind of little identifying, in this house we believe these things,
Right.
is what it said. You know, and but to look at that all in one category, and we tend to use symbols that get so loaded with meaning that it's hard to get to all the nuances, like, you know, and sometimes conflicting messages, you know, and people, you know, carrying support the police flags in combat with police officers. That's like, what? I don't understand what you're doing
Yeah.
here. When
Yeah.
when you've got a flag with a blue line, which is supposed to be supporting the police, and you're attacking a police officer, the symbol became different than the reality. And that's what I'm trying to be clear about in my life is how is my life embody my values? I mean, I shared that UU line. We claim to be a community of deed, not creed. What I do is more important than what I say.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's at least some common ground. So yeah, well, that was a quick hour. Thank you, Dennis, so much for participating in this discussion. It's always a
Yeah.
pleasure having you.
It's a
And
little small group ministry group that I get to go to. So.
that's right.
Yes.
All right. Well, I hope you all have a beautiful Sunday. If you're watching online, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It does help us very much with the algorithms. Other than that, we will see you next Sunday.
Thank
Have a
you
great
all.
day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.